want to introduce Father Jerry Hall, who was a longtime priest in Akron, Ohio, and now is retired in Florida. I don't know why you went to Florida. I would have stayed in Akron.
North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. Okay, now I understand. Now I understand why. So now in North Carolina. And but Father Jerry also should be mentioned because this is a historic event in terms of being the really first public conversation open to all people. But at the Clergy Lady Conference in 2018, I think, right?
Yeah.
Father Jerry was one who organized a discussion within the Clergy Lady Conference. Of course, that conference is an invite-only conference, but it was very important, and they assigned a really small room. I don't think it was their sizes, but I think they assigned a small room, but it turned out to be overflowing, right? Because then it was such an important conversation. So Father Jerry's been very instrumental in trying to have people have this kind of dialogue, have this kind of conversation. He will serve as moderator, and I'll let him sort of take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Telly. Hey, can you do one favor, Telly? Can you make sure we have like one of those little clear glasses out there?
Oh, yeah.
For the drinks. I need it for something for later. Okay, thanks. All right. So, make sure that you can all hear me. It's great to be here today, and this is really a historic day, so I'm thankful for all of you here. I'm thankful for my panel members that I'll introduce in just a moment. So we each have something to offer, and in between our individual sort of offerings, we'll have an opportunity for the panelists to just maybe talk about something that was significant for them, and then we promise to leave some time at the end to hear from all of you. Because that's really what has, thank you. That's really what has been sort of the crux of my ministry and our ministry with my wife, Presbytera Helene, who's front and center. So our speakers on our panel today, Elizabeth Tzagournis is a writer and producer based in Los Angeles. She grew up in Columbus, Ohio, a Buckeye. Graduated from The Ohio State University in 2017 with a degree in journalism. In 2020, Elizabeth wrote My Big Fat Greek Coming Out Story for the Queer 26 on the intersection between her faith, culture, and sexuality. She's led affirming fellowship groups, wrote profiles on LGBTQ+ identifying artists, hosted queer events, and participated in the Reformation Project's 2021 cohort. During the pandemic, Elizabeth and her sister created Dating Greek, which was a virtual blind dating series that connects Greek Americans to help them find love. And to date, they have released 4 seasons. One couple is married, one couple engaged with fans across the country. She's proud of her Greek roots in Crete, Naupactos, and Tripoli. Dr. Harry Pappas, also one of our speakers, is the presiding priest at Archangel's Greek Orthodox Church in Stamford, Connecticut. He's a native of St. Louis. Father Harry studied at Davidson College, Holy Cross School of Theology, Harvard Divinity School, and Yale University, where he earned a PhD in the Old Testament. After 38 years of pastoral experience in various parishes, he's taught courses in biblical Hebrew at Yale, Old Testament, pastoral theology, parish administration, and preaching at St. Vladimir Seminary and Holy Cross. Along with short-term mission trips and service to the homeless, he has been an active participant in local, national, and international organizations. Father Harry has been married to Carrie Kaludis for 42 years since they met at seminary. They are blessed with 3 children and 6 grandchildren. He's a practitioner of contemplative prayer, enjoys reading, physical exercise, nature, and good movies. And to my immediate left, Dr. Bryce Rich holds a PhD in theology from the University of Chicago. His specializations include historical theology of the late antique and medieval periods, queer theory and theologies, and modern religious thought. His research interests include theological anthropology, 20th century theologians of the Russian diaspora, and sacramentology. As a scholar in the Chicago tradition, he writes for multiple publics in hopes of fostering understanding and building bridges across society's many divides. Bryce has participated in 6 conferences on orthodoxy and sexuality in Finland, Norway, and England, and we made reference to those with one of the books from the earlier session. And me, as Telly mentioned, I'm newly retired after 34 years of ministry in Akron, Ohio at the Church of the Annunciation. I began my sort of professional career as a pharmacist, and then after 5 years of marriage and pharmacy, felt a calling to the priesthood and went to seminary at Holy Cross. And then my wife and I have had an active ministry to married couples, including founding the first expression of Orthodox worldwide marriage encounter. I have a certificate in marriage and family counseling from the Antiochian House of Studies. And I'm presently the administrator of a new program to facilitate and fund clergy sabbaticals in the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese. I'm enrolled in a program to become a master gardener. That's what you can do when you're retired. And so I'm enjoying the fruits of 44 years of marriage with 4 sons and now 5 grandchildren. So as I said, it's a privilege to have this conversation today, excuse me. And I want to thank Elena and Orlando for reaching out to my wife and I when they were writing the position paper to His Eminence Archbishop Elpidiophoros. We got involved with them, and that was a great blessing, and that has really sort of been the impetus for this whole gathering today. But it wouldn't have been possible without Fordham and the Orthodox Christian Studies Center. So we thank everyone for making this a possibility. And as I say that, I want everyone to realize just really how important this conversation is that we are having today to so many people in the Orthodox Church who are LGBTQ plus people. And their families. And I'll say a little bit more about that in just a moment. But this is really an important conversation. And there's 2 key words I'd like you to think about as we begin. And one is listening, and the second one is about responding. Both listening and responding as we address the pastoral opportunities, challenges, and ministries to the LGBTQ plus Orthodox. And so hopefully what we're going to share with you, what I'm going to share with you, and I think that my panelists will be sharing with you as well, is really, some of the actual voices of people from our communities and what they have experienced, what they're feeling, and what we need to think about and really begin to act as a community if we really care about one another. And so listening is so very important because it involves openness, it involves a willingness to accept what the person in front of you is saying with respect and acknowledgement of their own experience. And by listening, we can then begin to respond to the pastoral opportunities that exist for the LGBTQ plus community in ways that are affirming, healing, and acknowledging the validity of their experiences and the hurts and traumas that they have felt. But before we can really respond in true pastoral ways, we have to do a lot of listening to discover the needs that exist so that we can act in an informed and respectful and effective manner. So what I want to do is sort of share my experiences, my life story a little bit about how this became a focus in my ministry with my wife, Helene. So our son came out at age 19 in the year 2000. And when he did, a bomb went off for us. We faced the reality of his long struggle that was really unknown to us, that had brought us to this point in his life. And we faced the uncertain reality of what that would mean for him and for us as a family going forward. And because of really where we were at that point in time, we were talking about his choice. And his response to us, changed us forever. He spoke out of the anguish of his own struggle to accept himself and to be open about that and about who he really was at his core. And he said, who would choose this? And we understood at that moment, not that it was like a disparaging thing about himself, but we understood at that moment that this was not a choice. This was just him being him. And so we expressed our unconditional love and support, but we really weren't sure of what the path ahead looked like for us or what resources that we had to guide him and us. We were not sure who to speak to or where to turn. So we began reading books that we could find. None of them were Orthodox. We began to speak to a few close family and friends and clergy, all who were really supportive as we chose to love and accept our son and take this journey with him. And to find a way to, sort of with the new expectations that we now had as a family. And on that journey that we followed, we learned and saw things with a new understanding. In this process, our eyes were opened to the double standards of sexual purity for straight and queer people. We learned from personal stories filled with angst and frustration that revealed the unreasonable expectations of celibacy placed on the LGBTQ plus faithful for their life in the church. We discovered the prevalent don't ask, don't tell, and mentality that was mentioned in the last talk as well, that would provide for kind of under the radar acceptance or tolerance, and that sometimes did create positive experiences for some people. But I think that we have to be clear that that policy, that way of dealing with this important issue doesn't allow for personal openness or integrity or real belonging for anyone. And then we began to get to know many people from the LGBTQ plus community who, not surprisingly, were great human beings with many gifts and talents and integrity, who had exceptional personal and professional aspirations, who were often faithful Christians who were struggling with the rejection they faced from their own faith communities and friends and family. And these were not people with an agenda, but they were human beings who were just trying to find their way like all of us, to belong, to be loved, to have meaningful relationships and careers. But they were doing that in a culture that was sometimes anything but loving or kind or fair. So in 2013, I myself came out as a parent of an LGBTQ child during an address that I offered to a national presbyters retreat of about probably 300 clergy when I was speaking about our family. And I received love and support after the talk, and I was surprised to learn how so many people came up to me, clergy, that came up and talked about the fact that they had gay family members after the talk. And generally this was an affirming, experience for me. And then following the retreat, other priests began to reach out and to ask questions, to seek advice, or just to talk. And then sort of this network began to grow, and so many others then were calling or being referred to Helene and I to speak with. And that really has never stopped. And so as we were sort of coming along in our process and growing, and our son was thriving, we're realizing that there was more that we could do. There was more that we had to do. There was more that was being demanded of us by these people who were reaching out to us to provide help and support. And so really God began to open some doors for us to this aspect of our ministry that we really didn't seek. We were willing and we were ready. So in 2016, we were invited to speak at a family life conference in Pittsburgh, sponsored by the Archdiocese, and that was Father Alex Crucetus who invited us. And there we shared our journey with our son together. Helene and I did that, and what we had learned on this path of acceptance and what we thought was missing from the discourse in the church. And we were really not prepared for the overwhelming response of the participants to tell their stories about their gay children, family members, or friends. People really wanted to talk. It was incredible. There was so many things that people wanted to say, and so many comments that, because there were no opportunities in the present dynamic of parish life to do so. And so many people had stories to share, both that were positive and that were painful. It was amazing. It was really amazing experience for everyone. And this is what I was referring to about earlier, about how important this conversation is today and how important it is that we continue to have these kind of conversations. Another door was opened in 2018, as Telly was mentioning, when we were invited to give a workshop at the National Clergy Laity in Boston. And again, we encountered more people than our room could hold. We were scheduled like on the last time slot of the day at 9 p.m. after a long day in a little conference room that was tucked away in the corner of the center. But the response was really amazing. There was such an outpouring of heartfelt stories from faithful Orthodox people who were both celebrating who they were as LGBTQ people. And these were delegates to our clergy laity conference who were talking about their own lives and their family members and friends. But we also shared the pain and the trauma and the disappointment of the life of the church due to rejection, fear, and a general lack of care or willingness to discuss these issues. And I have to say, for a lot of people, this was an amazing experience. For a lot of people that were leaving in that room, their heads were really ready to explode. But I have to say that in that experience, there was a lot of compassion, and that there wasn't, no one was attacked in that environment. And so that was a beautiful thing, even though, like I said, heads were really exploding. And so, at the same time, we were all there together. The people were so thankful to be having this conversation at an official church gathering. And it really gave a lot of people hope. Hope that maybe somebody in the official church would listen and respond in a loving and accepting ways. And then at the last clergy laity in New York in 2022, we were getting ready to retire, so we could only spend really 24 hours at clergy laity. Probably my best clergy laity ever, 24 hours. It was great. Very few meetings, but in that time, we had 3 separate clergy couples who approached us privately about their gay kids. So this is not going away. It's not going away. So we have to begin listening and having meaningful and open conversations about the reality of the many, many LGBTQ plus people who are our brothers and sisters in Orthodoxy. And acknowledge that these are faithful people with active prayer lives and serious spiritual maturity who want to engage in the life of the church and who are really struggling and traumatized with the messages from the church that signal rejection, which signals to them that the church is not listening. They're not listening to that undeniable reality of their desire and need for an intimate relationship with someone of the same sex. And this desire that they have for love and intimacy and sex is just as natural for them as it is for straight people who seek the opposite sex. And that's not to say that there are not many loving and compassionate priests who are accepting individuals, who approach them in honesty and about who they are and how they're living their lives. They are there, but they also feel isolated in this approach, that their pastoral approach that they're taking to the people that are coming to them. So I want to sort of finish up by talking about the kind of people that I've encountered. So unfortunately, there are those who have left the church feeling rejected, and hurt, and have decided that the fight to stay outweighs the benefits for them. There are those who are disappointed, and yet they stay in the church, hoping for more openness and praying for a change, but they simply refuse to let go of the faith that is theirs. And they have the determination and fortitude to stay and live with that clash of values. And I have to say, as a priest, I have to live with that same clash of values. And I'm struggling with that sometimes. And then there are those who are deeply traumatized by the condemnation and rejection of harsh rhetoric by clergy and family. And this trauma can also apply to family members and allies of the LGBTQ plus persons. Some of these family members and friends remain in the church, and others also have decided to leave. And so this is a problem for us. There are success stories that we've collected along the way as couples who have been accepted by their priests and communities, their priests and the communities, and who have enjoyed the blessings of a life in the Orthodox Church with communities that know who these couples are, and they've embraced them, and it's a beautiful thing. But sometimes as well, I know that these situations can still feel tentative because of the potential tenure of their priest or the parish makeup. And so unfortunately, again, in our environment that has been fostered is that there's almost an outright fear to highlight these success stories because of the chance of outside criticism or pressure to discipline the couple or perhaps the priest. So my hopes for us going forward is that we begin to explore a new Orthodox perspective, one within our Orthodox framework of addressing tough questions, but willing to apply contemporary anthropology, science, and psychology to provide grace and economia, leniency for the LGBTQ plus people and their relationships that have long been a part of the fabric of human relationships. And I think I'm really thankful for Dr. Rich, who has done great work with his book to begin this conversation in his book, Gender Essentialism Beyond Male and Female. This is a great book, and I think you should all get it and read it. So I wasn't asked to say that, but I love this book, and hopefully we'll have a little more time to talk about that with Dr. Rich. But it's a great way to start this conversation. That we also have to summon the courage to study and sort through the fear and cultural bias and follow the history of the reactions against this part of our community, and to discern how these have shaped our approach that has been hurtful and not loving or pastoral. And to realize that the prohibitions of the past that are hurtfully and carelessly quoted and sometimes shouted were addressing behaviors of abuse, domination, and subjugation that cannot be summarily applied to the present day context. And to acknowledge that the vast difference between the past and the kind of relationships that people are seeking today. Because it's been my experience that many LGBTQ plus people aspire to find a partner, their person, with whom they can offer that same long-term sacrifice, commitment, and love of two people in a traditional marriage. It's my prayer that we can begin conversations that are open and where we can practice active listening so that we can formulate some compassionate pastoral practices for the LGBTQ plus Orthodox faithful in marriage relationships that allow them to remain as active and healthy members of our Orthodox Church. And we will be a better community because of it. Thank you. So we'll just take a couple of minutes to allow anybody from our panel to make any comments if they'd like to.
I would see. I simply want to say as a participant in the 2018 Greek Orthodox Archdiocese Clergy Lady Congress workshop that he's referring to, I was struck by, number one, I want to simply publicly state it took great courage for this clergy couple to be so vulnerable in public, because they were stepping out on a limb. And it would have been very easy for someone to saw that limb off, and then for them to be floundering around looking for some sort of rescue. And despite whatever criticism was levied against that workshop, there was zero in that workshop that I saw that was all contradictory to the tradition of the church, as simply as a way of beginning a conversation at a very national level to try to do something we've never really done before. And the extraordinary passion that came out of people wanting to share stories, to open up their lives and share them, was remarkable. I mean, that's probably the only workshop out of many scores that I've been to the Archdiocese that had that sort of energy that was just seemed to be released. It was like a cannonball going off spiritually, which, no matter where you stand on this issue, says something about the body of Christ that was overflowingly present. So thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
I want to add to that. As you know, the reason that I'm on this panel and that I came today, I just want to thank both of you, because it's already been like an honor to be in the audience and hear from such wonderful perspectives, such wonderful questions from the audience. And being the trailblazer is not easy, and doing it for someone you love means so much, especially as the child of straight parents. And I really appreciate that so much, and it's very meaningful. And just hearing the 2000 and 2013, all those moments, I mean, so much has changed since then. I can't imagine like what it was like back then for you all, and the fact that you were such supporters of your child, and to anyone else in the room who is doing the same for their own children. We appreciate you so much. And as well, we spoke earlier, but it goes without saying, like, I remember, I'll speak later, but I remember when I came out, and then I started telling my mom about girls I was seeing, and she eventually, it's a journey. Like, I'm sure day one is not what it is today for you all, but knowing that, you're in that journey with them, the people you love, whether it's your child or your friend or whoever it might be that comes to you with that, knowing that my mom was in my corner and that she was listening and she would ask questions. How did the date go? It meant so much to me, like little things that you don't think about if you're not, the norm, or if you are the norm, rather. Those little things mean so much. So just thank you on behalf of us. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you. Well, and I'm going to ask you to continue right on. So
Oh.
you're our next speaker. So
Am I? Okay.
Yes. So go right.
All right.
Just you're on a roll. Keep going.
Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Elizabeth. Thank you for the intro earlier. I feel, again, so honored to be here and just grateful. And I want to thank each of you as I try to make everyone's eye contact. Hey, everyone over there. I just want to say thank you all for being in this room today and sharing this space with us, because you could be many other places, and I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, and that it's a very heavy time, but I am just so beyond honored to be here. I came in from LA last night, and I really was emotionally moved to even know this was happening, to be invited. I could never imagine, but to know this event is happening, unprecedented. It is just huge. I mean, this is, for some of you might be allies, for some of you might be curious and unsure of what all is going on, but for people that really identify as part of the LGBTQ plus community, this is our lives. I mean, it is just out of, I would never have thought in this time that we're in that we would be having a conversation like this, but it's so important. It's just incredibly important to our livelihood and to the livelihood of all who love us. And many of you have someone that you love that identifies that way. We're growing every day, and I think it's amazing. We are not, hopefully, maybe one day we won't be as much of a minority. It'll be a little bit more accepted, and it starts with things like this today, having these conversations. For me, I'm the oldest of 6 kids from a big fat Greek family in the Midwest, Columbus, Ohio. I grew up with 4 grandparents that loved me so well, lots of aunts and uncles. I was really showered in love, honestly. And I thank God every day that I had that kind of upbringing. And I know it's not, the norm, but I do believe that is what the Orthodox Church wants to be. They want to shower love, and they want to make people feel so worthy and of value. And it's really hard to do that when you don't feel like you belong in a space and you don't feel like you are welcomed, whether it's from a person or just from a belief system that makes you feel that way. I've never felt rejected from an individual, thank goodness. Well, actually, I don't want to say that necessarily, but it's most people I have not felt rejected from. It's actually pretty rare, and I, again, feel very grateful for that. And, I think I have never had a stronger relationship with God than I have as I've begun to accept myself more, or as I have accepted myself more. And if the job of the church is to make people feel to have stronger relationships with God, then you need to make sure that those people feel love for themselves, that they feel loved by their community and their paideia. And so as someone that grew up in the Greek church, I was Greek dancing at the festival every year. I was, in Sunday school. I was in the wedding last year of one of my best friends who I met in Sunday school at like 6 or 7 years old, and we're still the closest today. And all those relationships is, I think, what we all know from our experiences with church, or if we can say that we're so lucky enough to know, but I think that is the intention of the Orthodox Church, is that community, that paideia. And so for me, that's how I grew up, oldest of 6, still incredibly close with my family. They all sent me warm wishes and wanted to be here today, honestly. Very supportive people. And so for me, I wrote that article, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, back in 2019, or Big Fat Greek Wedding. I also wrote that, actually. I was right around that. I was around 5 years old, but I wrote that piece. My Big Fat Greek coming out story. So that was a really meaningful moment for me. It was kind of, it was really nice to be able to remember how warmly my community did embrace me. And I think one thing I wrote in the article that I think back to and I wanted to mention is when I actually did come out to my mom, she actually kind of pulled it out of me. She was like, "Do you have something to tell me?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess." And where we were when we had that conversation was right outside the Greek Orthodox Church in Columbus. We were in the parking lot having this conversation, and it was unexpected for me. I didn't know she was going to kind of ask that, but I had been kind of leaving some hints and kind of maybe provoking her to ask me that question. And once we had our conversation, I never worried I would lose their love. I did worry things would be different, but now I couldn't be more grateful they are, because my family and everyone in my life knows me for who I really am versus who I had convinced myself I was. And I just think there's nothing more wonderful than feeling authentically yourself and feeling, confident in who that is. But as I walked into the church with my mom for, on that Sunday, I remember feeling like God was kind of laughing, like, I've known who you were all along. It's time that she knows too, she's your mother. And it's time you know too. And so I just felt that ever since that day, it has just gone better and better. And I know that it's, that tagline, it gets better, but it really is getting better. And these kind of events that we're in right now and these kind of conversations we're having, I hope that they continue, and I hope that you leave today with these conversations and that you can maybe share with someone who wasn't here what you heard and who you met, and stay connected, being invited into that little Facebook group, I think the LGBTQ Orthodox group, that is why I'm here today. And that's, such a beautiful place that we have to continue to pour love into these places that, you feel so alone when you have no one to talk to about something that's so meaningful. I am somebody that loves love. I started a Greek dating show about love with my sister. We put together a couple that's now married. We put together a couple that's engaged now and living in New York, actually. And countless friendships across the country. We've got 60, 70 people that are now from the show connected, and fans. I met a fan just now, and it's just, it's so inspiring. And it all started with the fact that my sister and I have so much love for each other. We wanted to work on a project together, and we wanted to bring love into the world. And it doesn't matter. I love that one of the other panelists earlier said, it's not about who you love, it's how you love. And I want the church to ask themselves, how are we loving our queer LGBTQ people? Are we making them feel loved? And end of the day, that's the first thing Jesus always asks of us. And if we look at also something one of the panelists said, sorry, I can't quote everybody specifically, but looking at the life of Jesus and looking at the things that he did and the way that he loved people and who he chose to bring with him. He wasn't choosing the people that were doing everything correctly. And I am not someone that believes being gay is a sin at all, but it's more like people not going the conventional way. Jesus was bringing them all along with him. He was saying, hey, you're not doing things totally the norm. You're doing things a little differently. Maybe you're not doing the right thing. Maybe you are doing the right thing, but it's a little different. It's a little out there. You're unmarried. You're whatever it might be. He embraced them all. He didn't ask questions before embracing them. He embraced first. And then when you have that comfort, you can maybe have that dialogue of let's talk more. What does it mean for you to be in relationship with somebody else? I have been dating woman for many years now, but I still am making those decisions of how to date to be more Christ-centered in the relationship. Because that's what we're all trying to hopefully be, is having a stronger relationship with Christ, with God, and then having our relationships reflect that. And that doesn't need to be something sexualized in terms of who you're dating. It's just how you're dating, how you're loving people. And a verse I recently read that I really liked is John 13:35, which is Jesus saying, or maybe John saying, that, we are known as disciples by how well we love people. And so as a church, how are we known? How are we known? By loving, and by our love, by our embracing and welcoming and making people feel safe and, in that community. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I mean, I could just go on, but I'm just happy to be here and happy to share space with everyone, and just hope that I can have more conversations like this. And if you feel so inclined, come up and talk to me afterwards. Thank you.
Panelists, any comments?
Congratulations. Stepping out. Taking the lead. For you.
I'm thinking that's hard to follow after.
I think what's beautiful to me about you and refreshing is that, you bring a beautiful sense of honesty and integrity about yourself, and your willingness to, to love and embrace just embrace everyone that you encounter. And I think, that was one of the things that we sort of touched on in the last session too, was, this sense of just getting to know, other people, and realizing that, we can't think of just the stereotypes of people in the past, but once we get to know people in the present, that is something that it can really, change us. It's changed me, and it can change each and every person. And I think that's one of the questions that, we all need to ask others that we encounter who may not be inclined to be affirming, and to ask them, who do you know? And how do you know them? Who do you know from this community? Who do you know that's gay or queer? And how, what kind of conversations have you had with them about their lives before you make judgments? And so I thank you for the beautiful love and spirit that you have brought to all of us today. So our next speaker, Dr. Bryce Rich.
Thanks. So let me just say in the beginning, this is a little bit of a change of pace for me. Normally, I'm on the academic side of things, but we're going to talk personal today, so I'll pull off one hat and put on the other. I try to integrate them where I can, but when you're teaching classes, responsible self-disclosure is a big thing. I'm going to try to do that here, but it means something slightly different in this context. So let me give you a little bit of background. I'm a gay man, and I first came out at 16 because I was outed in the mid-'80s in high school. And since then, I have come out many times in many different contexts. I said I'm gay, but I also have queer sensibilities. And by that, I want to point to the Q in our LGBTQ+ for a moment, because in online forums, it turns out that people have different understandings of what that Q is about. For some people, it's questioning, and that's great. But in my particular case, it's queer, and by that I mean that I have a different lens that I look at interactions of dynamics of power and exchange and labels that we put on people and how our conversations shape our realities. And so those things are all important in my work. I was raised as a Southern Baptist, so I'm not Greek, you can probably tell.
I'm not Greek either.
That's true, but you were adopted, so perhaps I still have a chance. Let's see. I was de-churched at about the age of 17 because when I was outed, I knew already who I was. My church didn't know. And as soon as I went to college, I made sure that I put some distance between us because I knew it wasn't safe to be out in that environment. And I was out of church until I was about 30 years old. But there were some really good things that I got out of my initial background upbringing. And one of those things was that, A, it's okay to be mad at God. Which was something that I was taught both in church and by my parents, and that's great because I was mad for a long time. But the other thing that I learned was when you're over being mad, you can still talk to God because God's right there waiting and actually talking to you in the midst of that. When I came back into organized Christianity, I came into a non-denominational charismatic church that had a ministry to lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. And from there, I went to the Assembly of God, and then to the Metropolitan Community Churches, which some of you may know was a denomination that was formed in 1969 with a specific ministry to LGBTQ people. After that, I almost became an Episcopalian twice. I also spent some time among the Mennonites, and I went to a United Church of Christ seminary. So I'm kind of a mutt when it comes to religious background. But I became Orthodox because of my experience in seminary. There were several things that drove me there in the first place. I think I'd already worked out biblical inerrancy and sola scriptura before I started and knew that there had to be more than just what's on the page is what it is. But I come from a tradition of eternal conscious torment. For people who are among the damned, and Orthodoxy lent me a hope of a universal thread among some of its people, so that was really great. It also overcame for me a different problem, which was with hierarchy. Now, granted, it has its own issues with hierarchy, but there's no one person who lays down the rules. And there is a conciliar spirit in Orthodoxy, and I'm counting on that as being part of this presentation, because part of that conciliar spirit is in the laity, as well as in the clergy, and all the way up. And so I think we need to talk about these things more openly so that we can come to some kind of consensus. I'll also say I don't expect that consensus to happen in my lifetime. When I started this whole project, I was like, maybe 100 years. But as things have gotten worse online, maybe 200 years. We'll see. So some people run to or from their traditions that they were raised in to come to Orthodoxy. I actually was running to it because of answers that it provided for me and things that I was able to leave behind. But my experience as being an out gay Christian in other contexts are what made me think that I could come into Orthodoxy and be okay. Because if you're okay with yourself, then it's okay if you're in a parish where you're surrounded by people who might not understand you. At least you can have open conversations about it and see where you go to from there. I'm a little more jaded now than I was before, but not so jaded as to not participate in today's events. So we were tasked on our panel to talk about, like, what do LGBTQ people, the Orthodox faithful, need? And I just was brainstorming over a few things. I think we need a welcoming place to worship and belong. I'm glad you've had that. We need a place where we're embraced and accepted. And for some, we need a safe place to question and to grow and to be able to come out. For some, that requires discretion because either they don't want to or they're not ready to come out to the world. So having a place where you can talk to people and know that your confidence will be honored is also a good thing. Because we don't really talk about the T on the end of this, but I want to throw in for a second, some trans and non-binary Orthodox faithful need safe places to go to the bathroom. And so I want to take it from the high right down to the mechanical of everything. Many Orthodox LGBTQ plus parishioners are lonely. So I think we need to pay attention to how we incorporate people into the life of the church. We need to pay attention to how we organize events and whether they're arranged around gender or perhaps around a person's coupled status. So, yeah. I want to also go ahead and say, like, we've heard a couple of different times now, apparently there are a lot of clergy who have gay children. And I'm real happy about that. And I guess my prayer is that God continues to drop more gay children into the right families where there is some leverage that comes along with being awakened to a situation and then having to really think through things and struggle with it and work on this sea change that I hope will come in the tradition. I said this in a couple of other venues, but if you don't know any LGBTQ people in your parish, then you might look at yourself. And the reason for that is they're there. The question is, do they feel safe to come out and talk to you, to talk about their experience, that sort of thing. In order to get ready for conversations that you might have, I would suggest that we all think about how we want to respond to people before the event happens. So this is a good starting place for us with our discussions. Many of you, I'm sure, have already thought about these things, but if you haven't, this is a good place to start. Remember that when people come out to you, they're taking a risk. So thanking them for sharing with you might be a nice place to start, and listening goes a really long way. So questions about a person's personal experience and how they're doing with their faith, how they're doing in their journey, these are all important things in feeling like a person has belonging. I have a couple of suggestions for people who are priests and bishops. From my humble position, you set the tone, so avoid certain kinds of words in your conversations. And my first two, and Greg, this doesn't have anything to do with your question earlier, are sodomite and sodomy, which get thrown around in online conversations all over the place. Those words have really checkered and long histories, and they mean a whole lot of things to different people. Most gay same-sex couples would not describe what happens inside of their relationships as sodomy, and so it can be a real turnoff. The phrase lifestyle falls right in with that as well. You all set an example for the faithful to follow, so setting the correct tone from the beginning is very useful and very helpful. And also calling out when the wrong tone happens. And my other big thing is study, and study more. None of us are born knowing what to do with queer people. And queer people ourselves have to figure that out along the way. When I say study, I mean things like know what the biblical passages are, but also know how to interpret them, because the interpretations that get passed around normally are pretty weak. There's a lot of information online these days. Steer clear of it. That goes for a lot of Orthodox information as well. Except for public orthodoxy, yes. Look for information from reputable scholars, because the passages as they've been historically interpreted really have more to do with the kinds of things that Father Jerry was talking about in the beginning, where it has to do with subjugation, slavery, purported idolatrous practices of other peoples, that sort of thing. And they don't have anything to do with the relationships that we're talking about now. But in addition to that, I think that, and this will be controversial, I'll just say, or maybe controversial, learning about human sexuality and about human sexual health is very important. Many traditions have chosen an abstinence-only approach to sex education for youth. We see that it doesn't work. And in particular same-sex relationships, there are things, well, it's not just same-sex relationships. Unprotected sex in various contexts has consequences. And it might be pregnancy in one, but it might be disease in another. And so knowing about these things up front and being able to talk with people rather than them going blindly out and exploring for themselves and finding out the hard way is a really useful thing. And there's probably a context. It's not the Sunday morning sermon, most likely. But there's a context somewhere where we can talk about those things. And so hopefully I didn't go over time, but that's what I got for right now. So thank you.
Any comments from the panel? Father?
I just want to make a clarification about the world of biblical scholarship. We'd be less than honest here if there is no universal agreement.
That's right.
In biblical scholarship about interpreting the passages that are, let's say, most commonly referred to when it comes to dealing with the issue of homosexuality. So, yes, study is very important, and that goes for us priests and bishops and everybody else who's in the field. But it's not like it's all vanilla out there when it comes to dealing with controversial issues. There simply is not going to be a universally agreed upon by the quote-unquote experts for these kinds of passages. But the reality is we've got to keep working at it. It's unfinished business. So I just want to be fair to both sides of the issues for these things, that's all.
Is your microphone on?
Oh, no, my microphone wasn't on. So did everybody hear that?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
I was just going to say, I think it's so important to speak to the nuance of all of this. Like, no one is born knowing how to handle things that are outside of the norm, but children know how to love without looking at the differences. They just know to love people, but love and how to make people feel accepted and welcomed. There are things we have to discuss, and you brought up so many good points, and I do think that it all starts with talking to people that are part of the community, having discussions within our own parishes, making a safe space for people to come and say, how can you feel more welcomed in this space? What does that mean? Does it mean, another bathroom that we can have to have people feel safe? What does it mean? What does it mean? Like, what does that look like? And it's going to probably be different depending on the people in each parish, but just gathering and having discussions like we're doing right now is already, if we were a church, right, this group of people, I think we would feel much more safe and welcomed and accepted walking into a congregation filled with all of you, not knowing how you feel personally, but knowing that you're here and you showed up. So I think having that space in your own churches and having those conversations and bringing up the points that you brought up is the first step. It's not going to happen overnight, and I don't think maybe hopefully not 200 years down the road. I'm a little bit more optimistic, but I also know that it's not a smooth road. It's going to be a road with lots of curves, and this is the start. But you brought up so many great points, so thank you for doing that for us.
Father Harry, let's hear from you.
I want to begin by pointing out two things that I think are pertinent to anything else that I really have to say that could contribute to the conversation here. First is the very brief summary of Jesus' teaching. Repent, for the kingdom of God has come near. We usually miss the fact that because it's in the plural, and he's speaking to the entire community that he shares with, it's way beyond a personal application. And because the form of the way the tense appears in the original Greek is really clear, it refers to habitual activity for the rest of your life. In other words, the only way somebody can be a true follower of Jesus is to keep changing. Not for the sake of change, as once Father Alexander Schmemann abruptly pointed out, but for the fact of recentering our lives again and again and again on Christ and the revolutionary gospel movement that he starts. That's a challenge for all of us pastors, first and foremost, because we're supposed to be the spiritual leaders of the community. Second thing I want to bring up to you is, in my reflecting on this with 38 years of pastoral experience, I find myself, in regard to this particular issue, sort of identifying with Peter, the chief of the apostles. Why do I say that? Not because I think I'm the chief of anything, hardly. Christ is the chief of my flock, after all, not me. But because of this, after Pentecost, when, in fact, everybody's filled with the Spirit, and they're going forth to proclaim and teach and preach and continue the healing, saving ministry of Christ, well, Peter's confronted with a real dilemma. What do I do with a Gentile, Cornelius, and his family that I'm called to minister to? Because he knows that his tradition of faith, everything he's learned, everything he knows, right in the Bible, right in the faithful tradition passed on by the rabbis is, well, you don't eat. First of all, you don't eat certain kinds of foods. That's just forbidden. Secondly, you don't eat with certain kinds of people and socialize with them in certain ways and such. And what happens to Peter is nobody convinces him through logic to minister. He has a powerful vision once that he doesn't even understand at first. But that vision explains to him he needs to do this because what God has called clean, now meaning certain kinds of foods, forbidden for a long time, for good reasons, for very understandable reasons of keeping identity of the community, no, those no longer apply. And so Peter's convinced only on the basis of his experience of God, who has revealed to him this, only on the basis of what he has discerned through his own faithful life of prayerfulness as they continue to pray at certain times of the day, at certain times, on a daily basis. So it's not just the experience of being around other people. That's certainly the case because he has the experience with these folks and what happens when he begins preaching the gospel and they accept, but also what God reveals to him very powerfully that challenges all of his own ideas about what it means to be faithful. And again, I say that's post-Pentecost. So I find myself in a similar position here. My seminary training in the late 70s did not prepare me at all to deal with LGBTQ+ and all the other things that I had to learn about afterwards. My own family background didn't prepare me to deal with this at all. My own marriage to a woman that I met at seminary, who was accompanying all along, didn't prepare me for these kinds of things. So my own failures or successes had to come about through lived experience that happened with, meeting a gay guy with full-blown disease early on and going to minister him in a hospital when he's dying of AIDS. And my job as a priest was to go hear his confession and communion. Well, I I did what I did. Now, did I understand what I was doing? Probably not very much, 30 plus years ago when this all got rolling. But it was important for me to be there, to be present to this man, and to bring Christ to him. And even in the most magnificent way, the highest way of our church, the experience of the Eucharist. When I'm invited by a man in my congregation to go bless his home, I discover, well, let's see, he's not married to a woman. There's another guy living in his house. They've been living together for 25 years. So I pray the blessing of the home. And I simply, even though I was trained not to do it quite that way, I just thought to myself, do I have the heart to tell this man, who's a member of the Orthodox Church, well, you know, you're going to have to stop living with this man you've been with for 25 years if you want to come and receive Eucharist in the church. That was a dilemma for me. I had a priest who was conservatively minded, not some sort of, liberal left kind of guy, challenging me about my simplistic views over issues of sexuality, orientation, things like this. And that really got me thinking. I had another experience of a veteran priest of the church reporting to my wife and I when he went to minister to a man dying in the hospital years later who had been in a gay relationship for many, many years. He simply said, I've never seen the kind of love between these two men that in all the heterosexual couples I've ministered to for a long time. So what do you do about that? When a adult study group that I was leading came across the topic as we were working through a book that prompted discussing these kinds of issues about all the variations of sexual identity, sexual practice, and gender identity. When we come across this kind of a section, one of the members of this group, and it had been a stable group for a number of years, was able to finally present the issue of transgender. That's even more kind of out there on the limb. And the response of the small group was compassion and embrace. Mind you, people in that group represent different sides of the spectrum of thinking over the critical issues of our age. And beyond that, I would say, I simply have to bear testimony to you of lived experiences, that transgender person going through a turbulent adolescence of lots of issues, not just about identity, but simply about functionality and mental health and such, that transgender person now is flourishing in college. This isn't a step backward or some neutral thing, treading water. This is positive sign. I mean, it's extraordinary to think that someone who starts out one gender, transformed to a different gender, quite different, and most people don't know who may know about this may think, oh, that's their issue, I'm glad it's not mine, or, oh, whatever, but and parents who go through lots of treatment and counseling and many other dynamics to finally see someone emerge thriving is extraordinary. That's not commonplace sort of thing. So what am I as a pastor supposed to make of all these things? Well, what I learned over time was, the first thing is to welcome and never to dismiss. Because in some ways, my own training was a bit more black and white about these kinds of things at seminary. And part of what we have to do in real pastoral work is unlearn things that we learned in training. Not because those who trained us were somehow deliberately wanting to misguide us. They're simply limited. Nobody's the The only teacher in the church who's unlimited is Jesus. So if anybody else ever claims they are not have any limitations of teaching, simply don't accept that. And that learning process of unlearning and learning, and I think I'll finally end with this to give plenty of time for us to converse, is I do believe that the issue of listening is so commonly talked about now, but is one of the most difficult things for anybody to do, including pastors. Because the job of listening starts in the Christian community of faith to Christ. And that listening cannot be taken for granted because you've taken New Testament 101 at school and learned a few things here and there. That listening is ongoing. That listening is reassuring, is consoling, it's also disturbing, and it is challenging. And that listening that's so abundantly evidenced in the dialogue between humanity and God, as recorded in Scripture, is eloquent, powerfully eloquent. Perhaps crystallized in the book of Psalms, because not only is it okay to be angry with God, but it teaches you how to pray through anger with God. Not only is it okay to be tragically disappointed by God, it's okay to hold God accountable for holding his end up of the bargain in a covenant community. Because this isn't just binding us to the one true God, it's the one true God limiting himself deliberately to bind himself to us. So it's okay for us to say, you're not holding up your end of the bargain. I need you to show up. It's okay for there to be stone silence, which tragically can be the case with most of the people in the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to the Orthodox Church, because it's deafening silence because of the inability for us to have disinterested, or rather Christ-interested, dispassionate conversations with people based on their lived experience. The final thing I have to say is first-person dialogue. It's so easy in the controversial issues of our age to get into third-person speech. He, it, they, this, that, with pronouncements. It's completely different in the church for us to learn how to speak from our own personal experience, not from somebody else's, our own. And to be able to have it takes courage to be vulnerable to do this. We have to learn how to do it because our world, our culture is saturated, oversaturated with words that deafen us in our ability to listen and don't do a very good job teaching us to speak with our own authentic voice. I've had to learn all these things the hard way. And my prayer in the church is that those tasks that are in front of us may expand. Thank you.
Well, Father Harry, you started your comments about my talk about my vulnerability, and I want to thank you for yours as well. And for the, the beautiful way that you've loved the people who have come in your path and been willing to face difficulties and face things that you were unsure of in such a beautiful, loving way while trusting God in all of that. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Yeah, I wanted to also say, you made humanity very personal with all those memories you shared and those experiences, and you're right. It's not about the masses. It's about the individuals that cross our paths, and you can't, especially in the role that you've both been in, like you can't choose who crosses your path and what those needs are from your community, but meeting each need with compassion and grace, and it's beautiful that you were able to do that in the capacity that you did and really change lives along the way. And nothing isn't a binary. There aren't black and whites, but it is easier to teach things that way, and I think it's just the way that things have always been. And it seems, especially from our last panel, like a lot of tradition, we don't necessarily know what the exact tradition was, and yet we still follow it anyways at the expense of humanity. And you chose humanity, and that's really beautiful. And I'm grateful that people like you have been around the 38 years you've been around, especially for those people that you've met along the way, that you've changed their lives. And I appreciate your passion and your compassion and vulnerability here too. And I obviously feel everyone else received that as well. So thank you for that.
Yes, now we can hear from anyone else. Go ahead.
Elizabeth, let's build on that on the individual level. So, as an observer, I'm a lay person, lifelong Orthodox Christian, but a lay person. If we were to wait around or hope or push for word from above, from the top of Orthodoxy, that our posture, our view on LGBTQ issues is going to change. We may wait around for 200 years, as Bryce said, or maybe 2,000 years. We've got a long, rich history. If we look at it from the individual level, though, you came out on a Friday, maybe. I don't know what day of the week it was. Maybe you remember. But you walked into church on Sunday. And it seems to start there. That's my observation. If 20 more Elizabeths walk into church on Sunday, with their partner or without, but being out, now there's something right there in front of us to talk about, to digest, to welcome, to embrace, to hug. And I think we may surprise ourselves on the ground level, at the individual level, of how welcoming our church really is. And Bryce, apologies to you that your formative years were not quite as welcoming and embracing as Elizabeth's, but I've seen it as an observer. Those who have the bravery, and clearly you did, to walk right back in on Sunday, there's a positive surprise there, and it's good for all of us. It moves the needle. I don't know if the needle's going to move from the top right away, but it can certainly move it at the individual level from the bottom. So thank you for doing that, and I hope to see a lot more.
Thank
Thank
you.
you to Father Harry for his individual efforts and work at the individual level, parish level, in saying, here you are and here we are, welcome.
I think it's just so, it's so like timeless, like loving people and seeing how, Jesus did that so many years ago, and us modeling ourselves after him, making, like you're saying, it doesn't have to be so complex. Yes, I would love the opportunity to get married in the church, but it's actually in my big coming out piece that I said, I probably won't like my siblings, and I've already given up on that. And that's not to sound dismal. It's like, I know what I want is just love and community, and that's what and we might have to wait on the other things. And it's not to say we aren't going to go after those things, and we're just going to settle with, exclusiveness in certain practices. But at the core level, it's, how do we show up for people? And like you're saying, and like we've tried to do, and we want to do more. Like, I was so blown away, like the response from my piece that I wrote. I got, people I don't talk to much were calling me, sending me a card in the mail, just showing me so much love. And it's in these moments that you really can show up for people. We don't do that on a day-to-day basis. When do you hear from people? You hear from them at the highest moments and the lowest moments. Maybe it's a funeral, a loss, an illness, a wedding, a baby. You hear from people more vulnerably in those moments. And I do think coming out too is like that. You can really show up for someone. But it is like Bryce said, like cultivating that safety. So someone walking into your congregation knows that they're going to be embraced if they come out. They're not going to be told some comment that breaks their heart, and sends them back to their homes and away from God, right? Because when the church is exclusive towards this community, they do often walk away. And I live in Los Angeles. It's not the most godly city. And, I found...
City of Angels.
It is the city of angels, yeah. It's almost like an oxymoron. But I've seen it, I've seen so many people come to faith, kind of return to their faiths tentatively, because I also attend an affirming church in Los Angeles. I kind of go around to a few different churches, and you see people kind of tentatively step back in. And the one thing they're losing community, they're losing their paideia, but they're losing their relationship with God. And that's really what we're all here to witness to, right? Is that we have a relationship that's the most important, that we need to put all of our effort in, is cultivating that. And it's really sad when the queer community loses that opportunity based on the way the congregation responds to them. So I think that's 100% right. If you could just show love, we don't need to wait 200 years for the church to be on board with loving someone. I mean, look at what you've done. You were literally told no, and you still did it because you knew what it would do probably to those people if you were to refuse them the love and the care and the embrace that is literally being Jesus in the here and now, the hands and feet of Jesus. So that's really what we need more of, for sure.
Thank you. There's another comment up here.
So, if I could, I would like to say to both of you as clergymen, you are who make the difference, right? Your compassion. I've been very blessed. I came out in 1993, and I never left the church. And the reason I never left the church is because I have a half dozen spiritual leaders who guided my life just like you two men, and kept me attached to the church. In 2007, when my husband and I were about to have children, in fear, I went to my priest, Father Dennis Struzis. Been my priest for 30 years at that point. Said, I got a thing I got to come talk to you about. You know my friend Rick? He and I are having babies. And he looked at me and he said, Nick, I'm baptizing your children. Now sit down and talk to me about the thing you've not talked to me about. And it was all about my sexuality, right? When my husband died tragically in 2017, his funeral, thanks to clergy, was in the cathedral in front of 600 people. We've been here a very long time, and this is not new, but the communities rely on the spiritual leaders, and the more the spiritual leaders, that's why I was going like this when you said you have to unlearn some of the things you learn in seminary. I was agreeing with you, because it's our spiritual leaders in Orthodoxy that will lead the flock. And it doesn't have to be from on high. It has to be in the parish, in the community, and to help people sort through their fears. And I could not be more grateful for the two of you and the courage over so many decades, in addition to so many other clergy, because I have walked out of churches because of clergy, right? And you walk into churches because of clergy and community. So thank you.
Yes. Oh, yeah, sir.
I was thinking what Elizabeth said about church, and I think this is church. I'm feeling joy and fear at the same time, which is what I feel in church. My name is Andrei Protikevich. I was an Orthodox priest for 23 years in the Ukrainian Archdiocese. And I left because I found a man I wanted to live my life with, and we have been together for 21 years. 13 years ago, I started a small website called orthodoxandgay.com because I didn't know what to do with the thoughts I was having. And every day I answer emails from people around the world who are looking for the love of Christ, Orthodox Christians. And I think it's easy to be baptized in the church. You know, even the great Orthodox Archbishop baptizes children of a gay couple, or to bury somebody who's gay. What do you do for the middle parts? So, Elizabeth, I hope that when you're ready to marry, you find that priest, perhaps two on this panel, who will be willing to marry you, because there are numerous of us out there, LGBT, Orthodox Christians, who are all seeking the same thing that everyone else is seeking, the love of Christ, right, and to be accepted. But my own husband heard from a priest that what he is so evil, even the devil does not want it. How quickly do you think my husband went back to that church? And so we're constantly seeking, priests who are going to embrace us as we embrace them. And it's not so easy. Perhaps it's easier in the Greek Archdiocese. I don't know. I live in kind of the Slavic world. It's much more difficult. But again, the nervousness in my voice, I'm sorry about that, but I am so overjoyed over what I'm seeing today. And reading Dr. Rich, your book in particular was magnificent. Thank you for this, Dr. Bryce. And just
Yeah, please.
So, like with all the great issues of any age, we learn at least one lesson from church history without knowing the details that these scholars brought up. And that is, the real issues of the age are never resolved quickly. They take generations to resolve. And I remember hearing Father Tom Hopko years ago say he felt the dogmatic issue of age was anthropology. I've since, this is years ago he said, that I've since broadened it to realize it's being creatures, because we're quickly moving into a culture where we literally are going to become our own gods in frightening ways of the material means with which we conduct ourselves. And in any case, what I would urge is for Southern Baptist churches or this Orthodox church, let's keep in mind the humility teaches us, because no college ever offered a course in humility, tragically, but humility helps us realize, okay, people that do things very differently than we would do them are also fellow travelers along the way. And while we can mourn or grieve or feel sorry or anger over those things, we've got to check ourselves at the gates of our own predispositions to accept them as well, and to love them in the midst of the disagreement and the argument and the deafening silence and the closed doors and so forth, because this is all part of working through the issues of the age that, in fact, the church has always done, even if our rhetoric gets awful. And there was pretty bad rhetoric in the 4th and 5th centuries too. And probably the good thing is that they didn't have social media outlets like we have that amplify and make it even worse. But we're all fellow travelers. We've all got to part of our loving is precisely loving in those painful and tragic circumstances, not to give up of those things.
Father Aaron, what can we do for you or Father Jerry to get you more air cover so that you're not defrocked or depensioned or have leverage put on you while you're doing what you're doing for the people in this church? Is there anything we can do?
Father Jerry's already getting his pension.
Yeah.
But I would imagine you took some pressure and some shrapnel in 2018, and I would imagine that doesn't go away as these conversations continue.
Yeah, it happens. I think the best thing, and I think the one thing that is for people in the pews to be a voice as well. I mean, we can lead, but we also have to, we have to have those voices of the faithful. I think that's one of the things that's beautiful about what's happening in the Roman Catholic Church right now with their synodality movement, and that is that they're willing to listen to, they're trying to listen to all of the voices. And so I think the challenge that we have from what Nick was talking about with Father Dennis, and that's what I was talking about earlier, with that there's all of these success stories, but there's not a way for us to like really come together and to like bring all of those people together to show sort of the solidarity of what is actually happening. And so, if we can figure out how to bring those voices together, then I think then we can become, more energized and more, a more powerful voice.
My response is a little different. Let's remember, Chrysostom didn't write down his sermons. The people who heard him wrote them down, preserved them, kept them going. So if the people want to do something about what they hear that's godly from their leadership, your practical ways of encouraging us can help, because we can't solve all these things. We don't know what the effect of our ministry is on everybody, but that feedback is important for people in pastoral work. Forgive me if I'm commenting too much. Please understand the situation we're in as Orthodox in America. There are jurisdictions and parishes that are small, where the clergy have a much better chance to get to know their people. And in the Greek Orthodox diocese with these big churches, we call a church with a couple hundred families small. I mean, how does a pastor get to know his people? He can't get to know hundreds of families. You're lucky if you get to know 15, 20, 25, 30. You count them in one hand or multiple times with your fingers. And despite the open communication that's unprecedented for people to be able to talk with each other, all these different means, we live in I'm convinced, our culture, we're afraid of intimacy. We fear intimacy. We fear being known. Everything exists on a certain level of looking good, being good, doing good, presenting ourselves, and all that jazz. It's hard for pastors to get to know their people. And it starts with getting their own self-knowledge to be able to do that, to be comfortable in our own skin before we can really do that with other people. That's a major step forward in pastoral work, outside the formal religiosity that prevails in larger congregational life.